Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. My name's Steph, and I'm broadcasting to you from the Podcast HQ, the National Centre for Writing in Norwich, where I have to say, it is extremely hot. I hope the weather is also nice wherever you are listening from, and that you can chill out and get comfortable while hitting play on our latest episode. Today, we're talking about collaboration. Writing can sometimes feel like a solitary act, so it's great to hear from two artists who have found great reward in working together across different disciplines. Perhaps their conversation will spark some collaborative ideas of your own. Our speakers today are Maarja Pärtna and Penny Boxall, who are joined in conversation by my colleague Kate Griffin to discuss their experience of collaborating creatively on a project called Bring Your Own Utopia. And this was a project led by Prima Vista Literary Festival and Tartu UNESCO City of Literature. The project saw 5 writers from other cities of literature around the world spend a month in residency in Tartu, collaborating with a local artist to create 5 new works. Maarja Pärtna is an Estonian writer, translator and editor who focuses on socio-ecological themes in her work. She has published 5 poetry collections and her poems have been translated into more than 10 languages. Penny Boxall is a poet and children's writer. She won the 2016 Edwin Morgan Poetry Award with her debut collection, Ship of the Line. Her 4th poetry book, The Curiosities, was published in June 2024. Penny and Maarja's conversation touches on the vulnerability of working collaboratively, how collaboration is a great opportunity to learn from other writers and artists, and their advice for other writers planning to collaborate across borders. So let's get stuck in. I will hand over now to my colleague Kate Griffin, who is in the interview chair speaking to Maarja Pärtna and Penny Boxall.
Hello, I'm Kate Griffin, and today I'm joined by the poets Penny Boxall and Maarja Pärtna. We're going to talk about their international collaboration called From the Estonian Bog to the Norfolk Broads. Penny, you're from Norwich, and Maarja is from Tartu in Estonia, which is a fellow UNESCO City of Literature. So my first question to you both is, when and how did you meet? Penny, do you want to go first?
Yes. So back in 2019, I applied for a residency in Tartu. I'd never been to Estonia, and I'd seen that there was a collaboration set up between Norwich and Tartu Cities of Literature. And so I was intrigued and I applied, and I was lucky to get the residency, which was planned for May 2020. And of course, it couldn't happen at that point. So finally, after much sort of toing and froing, I finally went to Tartu in August 2022. And I really loved the city. And I was also really interested by the nature that is available round and in Tartu. And so I wanted to experience more of it. And in particular, I was interested in wildlife. And so actually when Maria Unt, who organises the residencies there, said, was there anything in particular I'd like to do? Of course, I said, yes, I'd love to go to the National Museum, and I'd love to, go to the Literature Museum and all of these places. And then I said, and I'd love to see some more of the river life, and I'd love to see a beaver, if that is possible, because I've never seen one in the wild. And so I was put in touch with Maarja, who took me on a really delightful walk up the river Emijoki, which is one of my favourite things about Tartu, this beautiful, clean, very, very green and luscious river. And we did not spot any wildlife at all, but we did make firm friends. So that led to sort of further explorations of the natural habitats around Tartu, including to the bog. So Maarja, with our friends Piret and Ilmar, took me to Meinakuno bog right at the end of my residency, and I immediately fell in love with this landscape, which is like nowhere else I've ever seen in the world. This very, very green, very silent place. And I was really astonished by it. Kind of misty place full of stunted pines. And at the time we went, lots of cranberries growing on the moss. And you sort of walk along these stretching boardwalks, and you can swim in the bog lakes. And so that's what we did that dusk. And then we heard the cranes calling over the bog. And I was absolutely transfixed. And I really became quite interested in the kind of creative possibilities of the bog.
Oh, it sounds quite magical, Penny.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it was as Penny said. We met in 2022 when she was a writer in residence in Tartu, and I did take her out on a beaver watching trip. And sadly, we didn't see any wildlife. But I do remember talking to Penny about moss a lot. So I knew I had to show her Estonian boglands, which are mostly made up of sphagnum mosses or peat mosses. So we did end up taking a bog trip together, and we became good friends in the process as well. So it was a very fortuitous meeting, I think.
And what was it that made you decide to move from friendship to actually collaborating with each other?
We were paired up last year by the Prima Vista Literary Festival and Tartu City of Literature to collaborate on a project called Bring Your Own Utopia, which invited several writers and artists to work on the theme of utopia and to come up with new work for the festival, which was held in May this year. And very early on in the collaboration, we also decided to involve Estonian musician Liis Ring as well, so she could give our writings some kind of a musical and material form. So we ended up making a sound installation, which was exhibited in a gallery in Tartu during the festival.
Yeah, it was a really exciting process working with Maarja and Liis. So what it kind of ultimately produced was this soundscape, this installation that Maarja has described. And it was a 10-channel installation where separate speakers were put inside cones suspended from the ceiling, and Liis's soundscape played through these speakers. So between 2 and 3 of them would be playing at once. So you might have Liis singing one of our texts in one speaker. You might have a sort of Beatle soundscape from the bog playing in another speaker simultaneously. She used snippets of song. She created these beautiful kind of electronic soundscapes. And yeah, the whole thing just built into this really mesmerizing place. It really felt like a place. That was what we were hoping to do, was to kind of evoke a spirit of the bog. And of course that is, it's a geographical location. And I think, yeah, what Liis did so beautifully was to create this space. Several people, when they were there actually sort of experiencing the soundscape, said they felt like they were in the bog, which, yeah, was really what we were hoping to achieve, I think. And what I really loved about working with the three of us is that we each brought our own ideas and our own, preoccupations and our own approaches to the subject matter. And what actually resulted is something bigger than 3 parts. And I absolutely love that about collaboration. And I think it worked particularly well in this collaboration, that the sort of end result is something so much larger than any one of us could individually produce. I just find that so exciting. And I do think that is something that's quite close to magic. You have this spark between you and it creates this little blaze.
And you mentioned that you produced texts that Liis was working with. Could you both tell me a little bit more about the texts that each of you produced as part of the collaboration?
So I wrote a poetic essay in Estonian for the sound installation, which talked about an ecologically destructive utopian mega project from the 20th century, from the time when Estonia was still occupied by the Soviet Union. And this project was called Stalin's Great Plan for the Transformation of Nature. There were many aspects to this plan, but the one that concerned and affected Soviet colonized Estonia most was aimed at drying up around 1 million hectares of miry land to turn it into field and forest. So the Soviets wanted to turn useless and dangerous mires into more productive land. And this process was called land melioration, and it basically meant getting rid of excess water in the landscape by digging a lot of ditches. And we can still see the physical marks of this so-called utopian project all across the country. So a part of my essay recalls this war against mires, as it was called, and it also explores my own relationship to some of these meliorated places. But I also wanted to weave in a little bit of folklore to give a deeper sense of time and to offer a set of positive meanings that have also been attributed to Myers. For example, we have folk tales of people finding refuge in these wetlands during wars or plague outbreaks. So Myers have also been seen as protective places and useful places as well. The first paragraph of the essay is an old Estonian riddle, which I extended into a little poem, and it is called Mõistatus. Laud lamab soos, ei kuiva ega mädane, ei pehki ega roosteta, ei lagune ega kõdune. Mida vähem teda kasutad, seda väetim ta on. Mida rohkem teda pruugid, seda vägevam ta on. Mõista, mis see on. And this is a very rough English translation made just this morning. A plank lies in a bog. It doesn't dry out. It doesn't rot. It doesn't decay. It doesn't rust. It doesn't decompose. It doesn't break down. The less you use it, the weaker it is. The more you use it, the more powerful it is. Can you tell me what it is? Yeah, the answer to this riddle is keel, which in Estonian can mean both a tongue but also a language. And with language, the more people use it, the more resilient and alive it is.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Maarja. Penny, do you want to tell us a bit about what you wrote for the collaboration?
I found it so interesting how our ideas overlapped and sort of it felt like they were watercourses where sometimes they ran alongside each other and kind of intermingled, and sometimes they went off into their own little side kind of quests and then came back. So something I was really interested in is the idea of language in a place that is, for me, typified by wordlessness. You know, that one of the things that it so strikes me about the bog is this kind of textured silence that you get there. I've been there in summer and I've been in winter when it's been sort of completely white and icy and snowy. And it seems to me that the silences there are different. There's a kind of deep silence. There's a depth to the silence in the summer, and there's this kind of glassy silence in the winter. So yeah, wordlessness was something I came back to. Folklore was something I explored quite a lot. And part of my texts was a little collection of micro short stories that I call future folk tales. And they imagine certain events from wetlands as though they're being talked about in 500 years' time, when these events, which have been historical and have been factual, have been abstracted into something more kind of mythological and metaphorical. So I'm going to read a little short future folktale called How the Bog Began. It's about 2 minutes long, so I'll just read it now. How the Bog Began. This was not the first time the bog had begun. The first time was in the days of elk and great bear, and footprints in the soft mud so huge they could swallow you up. The bog was happy then with its black mirrors reflecting a churning sky. It would suck up the ice until there was none left on its tufts and tussocks, and at night it would sigh and burp contentedly. A funny thing about the bog is that it loves starlight so much that it swallows it whole, so the dark winter's sky is still lighter than the dark, dark bog. Then, afterwards, there had come a time when the bog had simply not existed. Maybe somebody had offended it, and it had moved north, where it would not be disturbed. Perhaps it had gone underground. Might be it had simply wanted a holiday from itself. More likely, it had just decided to hide. The bog is mischievous. It is best not to try to understand its motives. But when it went, it left behind some of its cherished secrets, like a child who had abandoned its nursery without warning. There in the dark peat were revealed the intact aeroplane, the good-as-new tank, the cars and bicycles and pieces of other rubbish. And scattered among them, like confetti, were older things, ancient things curled like dogs in the soft, silent bed of the earth, stained tar-dark, sometimes with a flash of gold around their puckered wrists. But all that was in the dead and gone time. Now the bog had begun again. It crept back, little by little, as if it were pretending it had never been away. We must have done something right at last, for it is there still, bigger than it ever was. We may ask questions of it, but it gives nothing back to us now. Nothing, nothing, nothing. So I think what I was trying to explore in that future folktale is the idea of the bog as both an archival tool and as something that swallows history. So it's a kind of ecology that can be very preservative, and it can also completely erase things. So I think between us, these conversations that we were having, we were talking about how memory works in language in such a place, and how we memorialize nature, all sorts of really fascinating conversations that I just love to have and really wanted to keep on having with Maarja.
It sounds like you really shared a lot of your reactions to the bog, and together have sort of created this very evocative image of the place. And it's wonderful to hear you talking about it. And the installation itself with the speakers and the sound sounds amazing. I was wondering about whether we could talk a little bit about the practical side of it, how you actually worked together with Lise, the steps that you went through, what the challenges were, and the support that you had for the collaboration.
Yeah, because Penny lives in the UK and Lise mostly lives in Sweden and I live in Estonia, the three of us met in person only once, I think, at the very beginning of the collaboration last year. And later I met with Penny separately to discuss writing ideas when she came to Tartu to work on the project. And then later I also met with Lise separately. We actually had a workshop for making handmade paper to produce the cones that were used in the installation. And this was, I think, the most unexpected part of the collaboration for me, because I didn't expect myself to find myself so hands-on in the whole process. But the three of us also had regular meetings online, which was really helpful. And yeah, I think this is how we work together in a practical sense.
We sort of had quite an experimental ethos from the start, which I really loved. I'm normally quite kind of sort of jealous of my drafts. I sort of feel like, not jealous in the sense that I don't want to share the ideas, but in the sense that I want to kind of keep them hidden and close to me until I feel like they're final drafts, because, you know, there's a vulnerability about sharing drafts early on in the process. But we decided with this project that we would, because we wanted to have plenty of time for ideas to interchange and kind of combine together. So I wrote quite quickly for this project, and I wrote a lot more than I would normally. And I would sort of bung the drafts straight into the Google Drive that we had shared, and sort of, you know, just close my eyes and click send a lot of the time. And it did feel vulnerable, but it also really led to some interesting conversations and some interesting threads in the collaboration. And it was really very intriguing to me to see what both Maarja and Lise picked up of my work, and then also, you know, at the same time, which threads I picked from Maarja's work to respond to. You know, sometimes, particularly with the texts that Lise sang, I was really interested in her selection, because sometimes it was the surprising ones which ended up being more kind of suitable for song. There were also quite a few bits of Norwich and Norfolk in this collaboration, which I found really pleasing. So peat bogs in Estonia, the ones that we've been to, I think, are mostly raised bogs, and they're these very kind of, I think, compacted and quite special ecological spaces. And they got me thinking about the Norfolk Broads and how those are a man-made landscape, and it's the peat digging that has created these expanses of water and the Broads themselves. So not long after we started collaborating, I went on a Broads trip and was shown around the ecology of the area. And that was at How Hill. I really, really enjoyed that trip. And I learned, for example, that the bogs were acidic while the Broads were alkaline. And there were these kind of interesting mirrorings and hinges between the two spaces. So I kind of really wanted these there to be actual tangible bits of the Broads in this exhibition. So Maarja and Lise made the paper for this installation, the paper which wraps around the cones of the speakers that form the installation, using reeds from Norfolk, which I just absolutely loved that they were able to do that. And another part of the sort of gathering process was I would go around and record little snippets of field recordings and send anything and everything to Lise. So in the final installation, we have things like the ticking of a clock in a church in the Broads, and we've got the sound of me walking through leaves in Surlingham on New Year's Eve, and some squelching footsteps from a trip to the bog in May last year, and the croaking of frogs from the bog. And all of these things kind of, they're sort of hidden. They're like little Easter eggs in the installation. And I love that Norwich is kind of folded into this bogland, just kind of highlighting the connections and commonalities between the two spaces, despite the very different visual. And so really it was about kind of throwing everything that we could think of together and then seeing what got braided together. I think that was really how we worked for this project.
Were there any challenges to the collaboration, whether it was the fact that you were working at a distance? And what support did you have through? Because it was a collaboration over several months, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was finding a suitable time for everybody, but we did manage to work around that really well. But I think we had excellent support from the organizing team of the festival, especially Maarja and Krista Ojasaar. They were really supportive and very encouraging. And I especially appreciate that they allowed us to make our own creative decisions. And I think they trusted us a lot. And I really, really appreciated that.
And in a way, the distance, while it was a challenge and it's always easier to get together, and, you know, it's lovely to go to Tahana and have a bowl of soup together and in Tartu and have these conversations. In some ways, it actually made certain elements, I don't want to say easier, but it sort of sped up some of the creative process, I think. And what I mean is I always find it easier to write about things at a remove. So, you know, whether that's the remove of a few days or whether it's a geographical distance, sometimes it can just help me to sort of narrativize something and to frame it in a different way. So, you know, for example, when we're in the bog, I'm not actually writing the poems there. I write down very, very minimal little notes in my phone. It's only ever kind of words or single words. And then I was actually writing the poems in the flat I was staying in Tartu, you know, with a cup of coffee and some soft music on. And similarly, sometimes actually, you know, being here in Oxford, I now live in Oxford, and writing some of the things about my experiences in Estonia, sometimes it can just actually help. It can make you think, okay, what are the images that I'm focusing on, and which are the ones which are shining brightest, and those are what you can end up writing about most truthfully in a way.
And what do you think you've learned through the process of collaboration? What have you learned from each other? And do you have any advice for other writers planning to collaborate across borders?
Yeah, I think what I have learned is that the literary arts don't have to be a solitary and individualistic art form. There are alternatives, and they can take you to places where you haven't been before, both metaphorically and physically. From Penny, I have learned a lot about British folklore that I didn't know before. And I really value her playfulness. I think she brings a very magical approach to everything she does. And it's been so fun to collaborate with her. And from Lise, I think I have learned how central atmosphere is when you are combining music with words. And as for advice, maybe trusting the flow of things seems important. So you don't always need to know where you're going to end up at, but you can just allow things to flow and see where it takes you. And be flexible, be prepared to be surprised by other people's creativity.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing has just been so enjoyable, and it continues to percolate in my mind. Maarja is, brilliant fun. You know, I've laughed so much doing this project, and it's always been surprising, and there have been so many magical moments. And I think one of the great things I really admire about Maarja is the kind of ability to make something really special. And so, you know, she sort of suggests these day trips out, and they turn into really, really kind of memorable, meaningful encounters. And I just love that. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be lonely. And I think, you know, since this project, I've really become almost primarily interested in collaborations because of this thing that we've been talking about, this kind of the output being more than the sum of the parts. And I just love that. And of course, we need some solitary time to actually produce work, and we need some thinking time. But I think for me, it's the difference between solitude and loneliness. You know, a lot of writing can actually be very lonely, and I never felt lonely doing this. I felt enriched and part of a community. Yeah, and I would say my advice for other collaborators, I would say give yourself space. And what I mean by that is that you actually want to be talking around the subject as well, and not always being like, okay, but how is this going to feed into the project, and what's our end goal for this? You know, along the way with this collaboration, you know, we had many ideas that never made it into the final installation, and actually, you know, probably weren't right for this particular iteration of the project, but they're really interesting, and they continue to feed into other things I'm doing, and they're rich conversations that I remember and I continue to kind of return to. So, you know, it's just about sometimes going for a cup of tea or for a walk, and not necessarily having bullet points in front of you, just being like, okay, you know, let's get to know each other, and let's recommend each other some books, and, you know, what kind of tea do you like? That stuff can actually be really helpful.
Have you finished the collaboration? Can you ever finish the collaboration? It sounds like it's ongoing. I was just wondering what next? What are your plans?
Well, Lise is planning to release the soundscape as an album next year. This is very exciting. And hopefully we get to show the sound installation in a different gallery at some point as well.
Yeah, since we did the collaboration, Maarja has been over to the UK, and we presented some related work at the Manchester Festival of Libraries, which was great fun. And then we came together to Norwich. So we've been thinking about the Broads as well, and the wetlands around Norwich. And so I feel like there are definitely more conversations to be had there, and kind of definitely more depth to be sounded out together. I'm excited for the future.
Same here.
Same here. That's all very good to hear. It sounds like it's been a very wonderful experience for you both, a very productive collaboration, and I'm glad to hear that the connections are continuing between the Estonian bog and the Norfolk Broads. Thank you both very much for joining us today and for sharing your experience of international collaboration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Maarja Pärtna Penny Boxall and Kate Griffin for their time. If you have any questions or you want to get in touch, you can find us at Writers Centre on Twitter and Instagram. We're on Facebook, and you can sign up to the NCW newsletter at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk. As a UK registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation today by visiting the National Centre for Writing website and clicking the Support Us button. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please do consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a 5-star rating and a review, because it helps other people to find us. Thanks again, keep writing, and I'll catch you on the next episode.